My name is Mara Whitaker. I'm 32 years old, and I'm a union electrician. I have been doing electrical work since I was 19. I started as the girl on job sites, who everyone assumed would quit after one summer, and I stayed long enough to become the person they called when something actually needed to be done right. I mention that because the money matters later. With overtime, I made about $92,000 a year. I was not rich, but I was stable, careful, disciplined. My dad had drilled one sentence into me before he passed away. Nobody is coming to rescue you financially, Mara, so rescue yourself first. By the time all of this happened, I had about $40,000 saved. That number matters. My fiance's name was Adrian. He worked as an office coordinator for a real estate brokerage and made around $52,000 a year. We had been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was scheduled for mid-October, 11 weeks away. My older sister was my only sibling. When our dad died 6 years earlier, it was me and her holding each other upright at the funeral while our mom was too medicated to stand. My sister had spent more than 2 years trying to get pregnant, 2 rounds of IVF, endless appointments, needles, hope, grief, hope again. When she finally called me and told me she was pregnant, I cried harder than she did. By the time this story happened, she was 7 months along. Adrian was not always like this. That is the part that still makes everything harder to explain. In the beginning, he was warm, funny, easy to love. He remembered small things. He could make a grocery store trip feel like a date. But somewhere around the engagement, something shifted. Wedding planning did something to him. It started small. He wanted a cohesive color palette, sage green and dusty rose. Fine. Then he wanted specific fonts on the invitations. Then the bridesmaid dresses had to be one exact shade from one exact designer and cost $280 each. His groomsmen complained quietly. My bridesmaids complained quietly. I said nothing because I thought wedding stress was just something people survived. Then the seating chart became a design element. An element. Then the napkins had to be a certain linen weight. I'm an electrician. I didn't even know napkins had weights. Apparently, according to Adrian, the wrong weight would cheapen the visual narrative. I was paying for about 70% of the wedding. His parents contributed $8,000, which his mother mentioned every time she breathed near me, like she had donated a kidney. Adrian's contribution was mostly vision. And by vision, I mean spending my money according to his Pinterest board. The total wedding budget had crept up to about $34,000. I was covering roughly $24,000 of it. And I want to be fair. I agreed to that. I loved him. I wanted us to have a beautiful day. I could afford it without destroying myself. The money was not the problem. The problem started on a Sunday evening at our kitchen table. We were going over the photographer timeline, the kind that breaks a wedding day into tiny little commands. 2:15 p.m. bridal party exits church, 2:20 p.m. confetti shot, 2:35 p.m. family portraits. Adrian was scrolling through the draft on his laptop when he stopped. Then he turned the screen toward me. "So," he said carefully, "I've been thinking about the family photo groupings." I said, "Okay." He tapped the screen. "For the formal portraits, I think we should do immediate family without your sister." For a second, I genuinely did not understand the words. I blinked at him. "What do you mean without my sister? She is immediate family." Adrian took a breath like he had rehearsed this. "Babe, she's going to be 7 months pregnant. She's going to be huge." The room went very still. He kept talking. "I've spent months planning the visual aesthetic of this wedding, and a giant pregnant belly in the formal portraits is going to throw off the entire composition." I stared at him. "The photographer said that?" "Well, not exactly." "Not exactly?" I showed her some reference photos, and she agreed it could be visually challenging to compose group shots with that kind of imbalance. "With what?" I asked. He hesitated. "With people whose bodies are significantly different proportions from everyone else." I sat there for 10 full seconds. I know because I counted. 1, 2, 3. I counted because if I spoke too fast, I was afraid of what would come out of my mouth. Finally, I said, "My sister went through 2 years of fertility treatments and 2 rounds of IVF to have this baby. She will be in every single photo she wants to be in." Adrian closed his eyes like I was embarrassing him by having a heart. "I knew you'd react emotionally instead of logically." That was the first crack, not the comment about the photos. That sentence. Because suddenly, I realized he had not come to me for a conversation. He had come prepared to manage my reaction. He said, "I'm not saying she can't come to the wedding. I'm just saying for the formal portraits." I looked at the laptop. Then I looked back at him. "Then there won't be formal portraits." He laughed. Not because it was funny, because he thought I was bluffing. "What?" "If my sister can't be in the photos," I said, "there won't be photos." His smile faded. "Mara, don't be dramatic." I picked up my phone and started searching the photographer's cancellation policy. That was when he finally understood I was serious. And that was when the argument began. For 4 hours, Adrian tried everything. Logic. "It's just photos, she'll understand." Compromise. She can be in the casual shots, just not the formal ones. Guilt. I've spent 8 months planning this, and you're going to destroy it over one photo arrangement? Then tears. Then silence. Then, finally, the soft voice. Can we just sleep on it? But I did not sleep beside him that night. I slept on the couch, not because he told me to, because I needed one room in that apartment where no one was whispering in the dark, trying to make cruelty sound reasonable. I barely slept. But by morning, I knew one thing with perfect clarity. This was not about a photo. It was about what Adrian saw when he looked at my family, and what I saw when I finally looked at him. The next morning, I called my sister before work. I did not tell her what Adrian had said. Not yet. I just needed to hear her voice. She answered on the second ring, sounding breathless and cheerful. Hey, sorry. Your niece is apparently training for the Olympics in there. I laughed despite everything. Still doing somersaults? Constantly. Then she told me she had just bought the cutest dress to wear to my wedding. That sentence nearly broke something in me, because while she was excited about standing beside me, the man I was supposed to marry had been calculating how to visually erase her. I kept my voice steady. We talked about baby names she was refusing to reveal, nursery paint, swollen ankles, random pregnancy cravings, normal things, beautiful things. When we hung up, I sat in my truck for a full minute before going into work. I spent 8 hours pulling wire, running conduit, checking panels, doing everything muscle memory could do while my brain was somewhere else. And the more distance I got from the fight, the clearer everything became. Because once you stop defending someone in your own head, patterns become impossible to ignore. The bridesmaid dresses, the seating chart obsession, the weird comments about appearances, the way Adrian talked about people like they were decorative objects. By the time I got home that evening, I was calm. Not less hurt, just certain. Adrian was sitting at the kitchen island with his laptop open, acting like the previous night had been a temporary misunderstanding. Hey, he said carefully. I didn't sit. I'm canceling the wedding. His face changed immediately. What? Not postponing. Mara, canceling. He stared at me, then laughed once. A short, disbelieving sound. Okay, enough. I'm serious. No, you're emotional. There it was again. That word. Emotional. Like empathy was a defect. Your sister can be in the photos, he said quickly. Fine. Problem solved. I shook my head. It's not about the photos anymore. Then what is this about? You. That landed harder than anything else I had said. His expression hardened. That's ridiculous. Is it? Yes. You looked at my pregnant sister and saw an aesthetic problem. I was trying to create a beautiful wedding. At whose expense? He stood. Oh, come on. No, you come on. Mara, people make compromises for weddings. By humiliating family members? That's not what I said. That is exactly what you said. He exhaled dramatically and walked away from me, then turned back. This is insane. Is it? Yes. Because I think asking me to hide my sister because her body inconveniences your photo composition is insane. That's not fair. No, Adrian. Fair would have been you loving my family because they're mine. He stared at me, then switched tactics. Instantly, his shoulders dropped. His voice softened. Baby. That voice. The reconciliation voice. The one designed to make conflict feel unreasonable. Please don't do this. I said nothing. We've invested too much. Money, time, embarrassment, image. Interesting what gets listed first. He stepped closer. I said something stupid. For months? His expression flickered. A tiny thing. But I noticed it. What? For months? I repeated. Where's that coming from? I held his gaze. Tell me honestly, was last night really the first time you thought about excluding her? Too fast, he said. Yes. A lie. I didn't know exactly why yet, but I felt it. The instinctive certainty you get when someone answers before the truth has time to form. I asked quietly, did you ever bring it up to anyone else? No. Another instant answer. Another lie, I suspected. But I had no proof yet. Only instinct. He ran a hand through his hair. Mara, this is what stress does to people. No. What? This is what stress reveals. That made him angry. Really angry. Unbelievable. What is? That you'd throw away 3 years over one badly worded conversation. I laughed then. Not because anything was funny. Because suddenly the whole thing felt absurd. One conversation? Yes. No, Adrian. One conversation exposed 3 years. That silenced him. Briefly. Then his phone rang. His mother. He looked at the screen. Then at me. Then declined the call. A minute later it rang again. And again. Apparently he had already updated her. That should have irritated me. Instead, it made me strangely calm. Because people only call reinforcements when they know they're losing. His mother got through an hour later. I answered because I wanted to hear what version she had received. Mara, she said immediately. I don't know what Adrian said to upset you. Upset. Interesting word. But wedding stress makes people say things they don't mean. I said, do you know what he said? A pause. Then carefully, not exactly. So she knew enough. I told her, word for word, about my sister, about the pregnancy, about ruining the aesthetic, about composition. Silence, a long silence. For one brief second, I thought maybe she would be horrified. Then she said, "Well, that one word told me everything. You could always do separate groupings." I closed my eyes. There it was. The blueprint. The source code. This did not begin with Adrian. It had simply evolved through him. I said calmly, "The wedding is canceled." "You're overreacting." "No. You're throwing away a 3-year relationship over a tantrum." That word. Tantrum. I said. The tantrum was asking a woman who survived infertility and IVF to hide so wedding pictures would look prettier. She hung up on me. By the next morning, the campaign had started. Texts from mutual friends. "Hey, is everything okay? What happened?" "Adrian says things got heated." Heated. That was a generous rewrite. Then my mother called. Sweet, conflict-averse, peacekeeping mother. "Honey, I already knew that tone. Please tell me you're not making a permanent decision over temporary emotions." I leaned against my truck. "Mom? Yes?" If someone told my sister she didn't belong in wedding photos because pregnancy ruined the visual balance, what would you think? Silence. Then, who said that? Adrian. A longer silence. Then a very quiet, "Oh." That particular kind of "oh." The kind that permanently changes how someone is categorized in your mind. And for the first time since this began, I didn't feel crazy. I felt clear. But what I still didn't know was that Adrian had already been planning this long before he ever said it out loud. But what I still didn't know was that Adrian had already been planning this long before he ever said it out loud. At that point, I still wanted to believe this had been a horrible lapse in judgment, a cruel, selfish moment, yes, but still a moment. Something ugly that had surfaced under stress, not evidence of who he fundamentally was. That illusion lasted about 2 days. Because once the wedding was officially canceled, stories started reaching me. The first call came from my cousin. He sounded awkward at first, like he wasn't sure whether he should even bring it up. Then he asked, "Can I be honest with you about something?" I said yes. He hesitated before saying, "A few weeks ago, Adrian asked if I was sure I wanted to bring my husband." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He said the venue might be difficult to navigate. That didn't make sense. The venue was fully accessible. I knew that because I had specifically checked. So I asked, "What did he actually say?" My cousin exhaled. "He said your wedding had a certain visual tone and mobility equipment might make the reception photos look cluttered." I went completely still. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misheard him. "My husband uses a wheelchair," he said quietly. "I figured maybe Adrian was stressed and phrased it badly, but after hearing what happened with your sister, I don't think that's what this was." That was the moment everything rearranged itself. Because now the photo conversation was no longer one isolated act of cruelty. It was a pattern, a horrifyingly consistent one. Anyone who didn't fit the image became a problem to solve. My pregnant sister, my cousin's husband. And suddenly I started replaying months of strange comments I had ignored because they seemed too petty to confront. The bridesmaid dresses, Adrian insisted, had to come from one expensive designer, even though some of the women clearly couldn't afford them. The seating chart drama, where he kept trying to move my aunt farther back because, in his words, certain camera angles are less forgiving. The obsession with visual symmetry. The endless talk about aesthetics. I had thought I was marrying someone detail-oriented. What I was actually seeing was something colder. Something transactional. People were either assets to the image or obstacles to it. That realization made the financial losses hurt less. Not because $10,000 suddenly became insignificant. It absolutely did not. But because losing money feels survivable. Marrying the wrong person does not. Over the next 48 hours, I started making cancellation calls. Each one felt surreal. The venue kept the deposit. $5,000. Gone. The caterer kept $2,800. The florist kept $1,500. The photographer, to her credit, was kinder than she needed to be and refunded half under a courtesy exception. The DJ refunded everything since the final contract had not been executed. Final damage, just over $10,000. I won't pretend I took that lightly. I worked brutal overtime for that money. Long days, frozen mornings, summer heat inside unfinished buildings, electrical burns, missed weekends. That money represented years of discipline. But every time the number made my stomach twist, I pictured my sister hearing Adrian's words directly. And suddenly the money felt cheap compared to that. Adrian reacted in stages. At first, disbelief. Then anger. Then silence. That silence was actually worse than the yelling. Because yelling is emotional. Silence can be strategic. He barely spoke for nearly a full day. I think that was the first time he understood I could not be managed back into compliance. Then he changed approach. Again. His father called me. Now, unlike Adrian's mother, I genuinely respected his father. Quiet man, thoughtful, never dramatic. He asked if we could talk. I agreed. He came over that evening, and we sat on the porch while the sun went down. For a while, neither of us said much. Then he said, "I don't agree with what Adrian said." Simple, direct. No excuses, no minimizing. I appreciated that more than he probably realized. But then he added, I am asking you to consider whether one terrible decision should erase everything else. That was the hardest conversation I had all week. Because if anyone could have made me question myself, it would have been someone approaching me with sincerity instead of manipulation. I told him the truth. This isn't about one sentence. He nodded slowly. I continued. This is about what that sentence revealed. He looked tired, older than I remembered. People make mistakes. Yes, I said, but people also reveal themselves. That landed. He didn't argue. He just sat quietly for a moment, then nodded. I understand. And honestly, I think he did. He left with more dignity than anyone else in that family. Adrian's mother, meanwhile, escalated. She sent me an itemized list. I wish I were joking. An actual itemized list. Her family's $8,000 contribution. Adrian's suit alterations. Accessories. Shoes. Miscellaneous planning expenses. The implied message was obvious. Pay us back. I stared at that email for a long time. Not because I felt legally responsible, but because I was stunned by the audacity. As though I had casually canceled a brunch reservation instead of ending my own engagement because their son had dehumanized my family. I checked with a paralegal friend just to be safe. The answer was straightforward. Contributions toward weddings are generally treated as gifts unless explicit agreements exist. No contract. No reimbursement obligation. Still, I sent a polite, professional response explaining exactly where the money had gone. The venue retained deposits under contract terms. I had personally lost over $10,000. I was sorry for everyone's financial losses, but I had not pocketed anything. That should have ended it. Instead, Adrian's mother forwarded my email to extended family. Subject line: This is who she really is. I actually laughed when I saw it, because by then, the smear campaign had become almost predictable. What I didn't know yet, what would completely eliminate any remaining doubt, was that the worst part of this story had already been sitting inside my apartment the entire time. Printed. Organized. Waiting for me to find it. What I didn't know yet, what would completely erase even the smallest surviving doubt, was that the worst part of this story had already been sitting inside my apartment the entire time, quietly waiting for me to find it. About a week after Adrian moved out, I started cleaning the second bedroom. Calling it a bedroom barely felt accurate at that point. It had become wedding headquarters. There were binders stacked on the desk, fabric swatches taped into folders, invitation samples, centerpiece sketches, seating diagrams, color palettes, printed vendor contracts, and an actual corkboard covered in inspiration images, like we were producing a magazine campaign instead of planning a marriage. The room felt strange without him in it. Not sad exactly, just hollow, like a theater after the audience leaves. I was taking things down methodically, mostly because keeping busy felt easier than thinking, when one of the folders slipped from a stack and hit the floor. Papers scattered everywhere. I bent down automatically to gather them, and that was when I saw the photographer's name in the email header. At first, I assumed it was normal vendor communication. Scheduling, lighting preferences, shot lists, the usual wedding logistics. But one sentence caught my eye before I could stop myself. Minimizing certain body types and group compositions. I froze. Then I sat down right there on the floor and started reading. The first email had been sent almost 3 months before our kitchen conversation. 3 months, not 3 days. Not one emotional outburst after a stressful planning call. 3 full months. Adrian had written to the photographer asking about ways to handle visual balance in family portraits where certain body types might disrupt the composition. The photographer responded professionally. She explained that she worked with all body types and focused on natural posing that flattered everyone without heavy manipulation. Completely reasonable. Then Adrian replied, That second email is the one I will probably remember for the rest of my life. Because now there was no tone to interpret, no emotional context, no possibility that I had misunderstood. Just plain black words on white paper. He wrote that he was specifically concerned about a family member who would be heavily pregnant by the wedding date and wanted to know whether the group could be arranged so she appeared less prominent. Possibly behind someone. Possibly near the edge. Something that would better align with his vision. I remember rereading that paragraph over and over because some part of my brain still wanted to reject it. Not because the words were unclear. Because clarity made it worse. The photographer, to her credit, handled it beautifully. She said she could absolutely help arrange people naturally in flattering ways, but she would not deliberately hide or minimize a guest. She even added that pregnant women often look radiant in formal portraits. That should have ended it, but it didn't. There was one final email, sent about a month before Adrian ever brought the issue to me, and this was the one that changed everything. He wrote, "If my fiancé agrees, I'll update the family portrait timeline accordingly. If not, I may need to reconsider the photography package because I can't have images that conflict with the aesthetic I'm paying for." I just stared at that sentence. For a long time. Not because of the money comment, though that part was almost laughable considering I was the one paying for the photography, but because of what it confirmed. This was never spontaneous, never careless wording, never stress. He had been strategizing, planning, testing the waters, trying to recruit the photographer first. And when she refused to participate, he escalated to me. The conversation at our kitchen table had not been an impulsive mistake. It had been phase 2. I felt physically sick. There's a specific kind of nausea that comes when reality rearranges itself in real time. Not heartbreak exactly, not anger exactly, something colder. The sensation of realizing the version of someone you loved never actually existed the way you thought it did. I took photos of every email with my phone. Then I gathered the pages carefully, slid them into a manila envelope, and locked them in my filing cabinet. I never intended revenge. I wasn't building a case. I just needed the evidence preserved because even then, part of me worried that time might soften the memory and make me question whether I had overreacted. Those emails became proof against future self-doubt. And honestly, the strange thing is that after reading them, I felt calmer. Not happier. Definitely not less hurt. But calmer. Because uncertainty is exhausting. Pain with certainty is easier to carry than pain with confusion. I finally understood exactly what decision I had made. And why. That should have been the emotional end of it. Closure. Final confirmation. But Adrian wasn't finished. About a week later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I had already blocked his real number, so for a moment I thought it might be work-related. It wasn't. The message started with, "I know you blocked me, but please just read this." And of course I knew immediately it was him. The text went on for pages. He said he had reflected. He admitted the photo issue had been poorly communicated. Interesting phrasing. Not wrong, not cruel, not humiliating. Poorly communicated. As though the problem had been messaging, not intent. Then came the emotional accounting. He had to explain to coworkers why the wedding was off. Humiliating. His suit expenses. The non-refundable arrangements. The embarrassment. The social fallout. His friends asking questions. His parents being devastated. Every paragraph framed him as collateral damage in a disaster I had chosen. And then I reached the sentence that made my hands go cold. He wrote, "Your sister doesn't even know what I said. You could have simply included her in the photos and never told her. None of this needed to happen. You chose destruction over compromise." I read that line 3 times, because the sheer entitlement inside it was breathtaking. His argument was not that he had changed, not that he understood, not even that he was sorry in any meaningful sense. His argument was that cruelty only counts if the victim finds out. That if I had quietly protected my sister without exposing him, his behavior should have been forgiven. That was the moment I realized something important. My sister still didn't know. Not the full truth. I had protected her because I didn't want her carrying pain she didn't need. But after reading that message, silence started to feel less like protection and more like concealment. And I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I drove to my sister's house that same evening. The entire way there, I kept rehearsing different versions of the conversation in my head, and every version sounded wrong. Too harsh, too vague, too protective, too late. There is no graceful way to tell someone that a person they welcomed into the family had privately been trying to erase them from one of the most important milestones of your life. Especially not when that person is 8 months pregnant, exhausted, emotional, and already carrying enough. Part of me wanted to turn around, to keep protecting her, to let the whole thing stay buried with the engagement. But Adrian's message kept replaying in my head. She doesn't even know. The arrogance of that sentence changed something in me. Because he wasn't saying my sister deserved protection. He was saying his behavior deserved concealment. Those are not the same thing. When I arrived, her husband answered the door. He smiled, stepped aside, and said, "She's in the kitchen reorganizing baby clothes for the 5th time this week." That sounded exactly right. I found her sitting at the table surrounded by tiny folded onesies, socks so small they looked decorative, unopened baby products, and 3 different lists written in her impossibly neat handwriting. She looked up and smiled, then immediately frowned. Because sisters know. What happened? I sat down across from her, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. Not because I was unsure, because saying something painful out loud makes it real in a way private thoughts never do. She leaned forward. "Mara?" I took a breath. The wedding didn't end because of one argument. Her face changed instantly. What happened? So I told her. Everything. The kitchen conversation. The photo demand. The aesthetic comments. The exact wording. The emails. The planning. The photographer. The months of strategy. All of it. I didn't soften anything. I didn't dramatize anything either. The truth was already ugly enough. She didn't interrupt. Didn't gasp. Didn't cry. She just became very, very still. The kind of stillness that is somehow louder than any visible reaction. When I finished, silence sat between us for nearly a full minute. Then she asked very quietly, "You canceled your entire wedding because of me?" That question broke my heart more than anything Adrian had done. Because even then, even after hearing everything, her first instinct was guilt. I shook my head immediately. No. She looked at me. I said carefully, I canceled my wedding because Adrian showed me who he was. You were just the mirror that revealed it. That was when she cried. Not delicate tears. Not movie tears. The kind that come from somewhere deep and involuntary. And once she started, I did too. Big, ugly, exhausted crying at her kitchen table while folded baby clothes sat between us like tiny witnesses. At one point, her husband walked into the kitchen, took one look at both of us sobbing, slowly backed out, and disappeared without asking a single question. Honestly, an extremely intelligent man. Eventually, when we calmed down enough to breathe normally again, she asked to see the emails. So I showed her. She read every word. Twice. Her face changed in stages. Shock. Hurt. Disbelief. Then something colder. 3 months, she said quietly. I nodded. He planned this for 3 months? Yes. She stared at the page, then looked at her stomach, and I watched realization hit her in real time. Not just what Adrian had tried to do to her, but what he had tried to do to her child. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a pregnant woman being excluded from photos. It was about treating her daughter's existence like visual clutter before she was even born. That thought visibly shattered her. And honestly, it shattered me all over again too. Later that night, I told my mother everything. Not the softened version. Everything. Then I showed her the printed emails. My mother, the lifelong peacemaker, the woman who believed nearly every conflict could be talked through if people just calmed down long enough. Read those pages in complete silence. Then she placed them on the table and said, I hope you never speak to him again. Coming from her, that was practically a declaration of war. Family stories travel fast, especially the ugly ones. My cousin found out, then my aunt, then the rest. And once the wheelchair incident surfaced alongside the pregnancy story, the broader pattern became impossible for anyone reasonable to ignore. Not everyone took my side. Adrian's family absolutely did not. His mother continued telling people I had destroyed her son's life over a misunderstanding. A vague social media post from his sister appeared about emotionally abusive women weaponizing male mistakes. Apparently that was about me. I genuinely did not care. Because once truth becomes this clear, spin starts sounding desperate instead of convincing. Still, one thing stayed with me. His father. Because unlike the rest, he had never defended what Adrian did. And I knew the financial losses hit him too. That part genuinely bothered me. I'm not someone who enjoys collateral damage. But every time guilt started creeping in, I would reread those emails. And the guilt would evaporate. Because this wasn't impulsive cruelty. This was deliberate. And there is a difference. A few weeks later, my sister went into labor. I got the call just after midnight, and everything else stopped mattering. I got the call a little after midnight. My sister's husband sounded calm in the way people do when they are trying very hard not to sound terrified. It's time. I was already grabbing my keys before the call ended. The drive to the hospital felt endless and strangely unreal, like my body was moving through familiar streets while my mind lagged somewhere behind, still catching up. Traffic lights took forever. Every slow driver in front of me felt personally offensive. I remember gripping the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. By the time I got there, my mother was already in the waiting area, pacing with the kind of anxious energy only mothers seem capable of sustaining for hours. Labor is a strange thing when you're not the one going through it. Time stops meaning anything. Minutes feel like hours. Hours feel like separate lifetimes. People speak in hushed voices for no reason. Coffee appears and disappears. Chairs become instruments of suffering. Everyone keeps checking their phones, despite knowing no useful update will magically appear faster because of it. I was there for 13 hours. 13. At some point around sunrise, I realized I had not thought about Adrian once. Not his texts, not the canceled wedding, not the money, not his family, nothing. For the first time in weeks, my life was no longer orbiting damage. It was orbiting something about to begin. And then she arrived. A baby girl, 7 pounds 4 ounces. Perfect lungs, perfect fury. Absolutely no interest in entering the world quietly. I held her within the first hour of her life. And something happened that I still struggle to explain properly. Because she was tiny, warm, fragile, completely unaware of any of this chaos. And all I could think was, someone tried to erase you before you were even born. Not literally, of course, but symbolically, visually, as if your existence, and your mother's, were inconveniences to composition. The thought made my throat tighten so hard I had to look away. My sister saw my face and immediately understood what I was thinking. She smiled, exhausted and emotional, and stronger than most people I've ever known. Then she said, "She's going to be in so many family photos she'll get sick of us." I laughed, then cried. Again, that little girl changed the emotional ending of this story. Because until then, this had felt like a story about loss. A broken engagement, a failed future, financial damage, humiliation, manipulation. But holding her reframed everything. I had not lost a future. I had escaped the wrong one. There's a difference. That doesn't mean the aftermath was easy. Financially, the damage was real. I lost just over $10,000 in non-refundable wedding costs. That money mattered. I picked up overtime again. Long shifts, weekend work, extra call-ins. The kind of exhausting routine I knew well. And honestly, there was something therapeutic about it. Work is simple. Circuits either connect or they don't. Problems can be traced. Failures can be isolated. People are harder. Emotion is harder. Trust is harder. Adrian's financial losses were real too. I'm not someone who needs to pretend otherwise to feel morally correct. His suit expenses, the family contribution, the wasted planning costs, friends who bought things, his father absorbing consequences he never deserved. That part weighed on me. But every time guilt started trying to rewrite history, I went back to the same place. The emails. 3 months. That number mattered almost as much as the money. Because 3 months transforms a mistake into intent. 3 months transforms stress into strategy. 3 months transforms a cruel comment into character evidence. That distinction is what gave me peace. The smear campaign eventually burned itself out. Adrian's mother found a new audience somewhere, I assume. His sister's vague social media commentary lost momentum when no one cared enough to engage. Mutual friends quietly sorted themselves into categories. Some disappeared. Some apologized. A few admitted they had believed his version at first. I didn't hold that against them. People usually believe the version they hear first when the truth sounds uglier than they expect. I never heard from Adrian again after that last blocked number message. At least not directly. Apparently he told people I was vindictive, cold, emotionally extreme. Maybe that made him feel better. I genuinely stopped caring. The apartment felt different afterward. Too quiet. Too large. Like a life built for 2 people when only one shadow crossed the floor. I thought about moving when the lease ended. Maybe somewhere smaller. Simpler. Not because I was dramatically reinventing myself. I wasn't. Life is not always cinematic in the way people expect. Sometimes recovery is incredibly unglamorous. You go to work, you pay bills, you answer texts, you visit family, you sleep better a little at a time. That's it. No triumphant makeover montage. No revenge dating. No dramatic transformation arc. Just peace returning in quiet installments. And honestly, that felt real. Months later, I was at my sister's house holding my niece while she gripped my finger with shocking strength. I laughed and said she already had the hands of someone ready to run a union site. My sister rolled her eyes. My mother took approximately 12,000 photos. And I had this strange, overwhelming realization. Every painful thing in this story became easier to accept because of where it led. Not because suffering is secretly beautiful. I hate when people say things like that. But because sometimes pain strips away illusions faster than comfort ever could. I thought I was building a marriage. What I was actually building was proximity to someone I should never have legally tied myself to. That distinction probably saved me years, maybe decades. If you ask me now what this whole disaster cost, the technical answer is about $10,500 and a broken engagement. But emotionally, it bought clarity. And clarity in hindsight was cheap, because now I know exactly what kind of people belong in my life. The ones who celebrate family. The ones who make room. The ones who never confuse aesthetics with humanity. And that little girl, my niece, she will be in every family photo I ever take for the rest of my life.